In this video, we'll continue to work with the same app we used in the video series covering the implementation of user authentication systems. If you haven't seen them yet, that might be a good place to start, and if you're watching on YouTube, we'll link them up below. We'll start this video off by building a list of companies, and then with these companies later on, we'll learn to add employees and finally use server-side queries to query the data. Before I started to record this video, I made some minor preparations by first creating one page for adding new companies, one page for listing companies, and one page for viewing a company. I haven't configured the scripts on these pages yet. I've just made a little UI for each one to save us some time in this video. Finally, I've redesigned the homepage from previous videos to be more of a menu that will take us to these different pages. If you're not familiar with how to build pages, we of course have videos on that as well. We'll get started by creating a data model for our companies by heading to the data model area. I'll call this model company model and simply add two fields, name and country. When I'm done, I'll just save the model and head back to the development area. Just as when we're normally working with data in our app, we'll need to create a collection to store this data, and as always, when working with data that should be accessible from multiple pages, we'll need to add this collection to the master page that loads every time another page is loaded. Therefore, let's head over there now and add a new collection. I'll choose that I'd like to create a new collection, and that the model created should be the newly created data model, company model. The scope should be global, as we'd like the data to be accessible throughout the app. And as for persistence, I'll choose that this should be stored in the database, so it will be intact even when we restart the app. Finally, I'll give this collection a name. I'll call this collection Companies. Thus far, we've only been doing things just as we would have done them anyways when working with data locally in the app. But now it's time for the real magic trick, configuring this collection for automatic synchronization from the cloud. By doing this, all changes I do to this collection will automatically be synchronized to our cloud database. I'll activate synchronization by clicking on the Configure button. Now, I'll be informed that synchronization will only work when user authentication is configured. As we've already configured user authentication for this app, we can now activate synchronization by clicking Activate Now. Next, we'll configure some settings for this synchronized collection. The only thing we'll have to look at right now is the option to set different permissions for data stored in the collection. The default setting is that only the user that created the individual data entry can read, update, and delete it. However, you might want to change these settings if your data should be available to other users. For this demo, we could use the default setting and only let the owner of the data manipulate it. More information about how you can configure these settings can be found in our knowledge base. With that done, let's go ahead and click Save. In a few simple strokes, we have now configured this collection to be automatically synchronized to the cloud database when any changes are applied to our local data in this collection. Let's go ahead and open up the Add Company page now. I'll put this page into the preview so you can see how it looks. As you can see, it's just two fields and a button. Let's configure the button to add this data to our collection. Adding data to a collection is done by using the data call add block. I'll map in the companies collection and then add the two fields from the page to the fields in the database. Once that's done, I can go ahead and close the configuration window. Finally, I'll add a page load block to load the home page again. I should now be able to just go ahead and save our page, and that should be all we need to do. I'll now go ahead and try out entering a new company name and clicking Add. Now, as we haven't configured the list view yet, it's hard to tell from here if the data's been added correctly. But we can always examine the app database by clicking the app database icon and then clicking our companies collection. As expected, we can now find our new company stored in the app database. But what's more interesting is what would have happened in the background. After the data was saved in the app database, it was also automatically synchronized to our cloud database. Therefore, let's go ahead and head over to the backend services folder, open up our cloud database, and check that out. As you can see, we have one collection that's been automatically synchronized from the app. I can view the content of this by clicking the name of the database collection and clicking on the View button. There we go. The item we entered has now been synchronized to the cloud database. We can also see the owner property set to the ID of the user. This all happens automatically in Aquro's cloud backend without us having to set much of it up specifically. The same applies to all changes we do to items in our local collection. They'll be automatically synced to the cloud. Let's check this out in our app by first configuring the list view to list the items from our local collection on the List Companies page. I'll edit the list view and configure the list view. Select that the list will load its data from the company's collection, and finally configure the mapping as always. Before I close the window, I'll also configure the action for this list to load the View Company page. We will also need to configure the View Company page, which is also a form for editing the company details. Let's open up that page and configure the button to update the item in our collection. This page has already been configured to load the item we were clicking on in the list to a local data item named Selected Company. Therefore, we can go ahead and update this item by copying the values from our input boxes to the properties of the item. For this, I'll use the string copy coding block one time for each property. When that's done, I'll use the data call save coding block to save the updated data item into this collection. I'll set the collection to the company's collection, and then the object to the selected company object. Finally, I can once again use the page load block to load the list companies page. With that set up, I'm ready to test my new functionality out. As we can see, we now have our company listed in the list, and when clicking on the item in the list, it will show me the company details in the edit form. If I change the name of the company and click Save, we can now see the item also has been updated in the list. The last thing we should check out is how this looks in our cloud database. Let's head over there and go back to the listing of our collection, and then back in to refresh the data. And there we go. The company has also changed in the cloud database. We can conclude that changes made to our local database or data collection are now automatically synchronized up to the cloud service. However, changes made in the cloud service are not automatically synced back down to the local database, and that's a task we'll need to take care of manually. Let's say we have an app where multiple users work on the same data. We might want to refresh the data stored in our app to the new data from the cloud database to make sure it stays synced. To do this, we can use a coding block called data call sync. Let's do this by opening up the list companies page and then edit the refresh button. As said before, to update the data stored in the cloud database, I'll use the data call sync block. I only have to specify which collection should be automatically synchronized, and then I can close the configuration window. As always, when updating data in our app in real time, we need to refresh the loaded data to the page by using the data refresh loaded data block, and then refreshing the list view with the UI component reload block. With this configured, we've added the functionality to update our local data with the data stored in the cloud. By using this method of synchronized data, the app will still work when offline, but still always have the possibility to work with data stored in the cloud. We've come to the end of this video and have walked through different steps needed to configure data synchronization, and also added the functionality to store data in the Aquro Cloud Database from our app. In the next video, we'll be using the Aquro Cloud Database, but instead of working with synchronized data, We'll use direct calls to manage and manipulate data stored in this database. We'll see you in the next video.